Welcome back to the JB Podcast. A lot of things to get into today. We got a packed show coming up next. So let's get into this. Joe Schoen gave his press conference earlier in the week. It's probably the biggest, most disastrous press conference I have seen in a long time. I really can't think of anything that really compares to that. Because we all knew what was going to happen. We all knew after the Giants are coming off their most embarrassing loss to the New England Patriots this year. It's the most embarrassing loss of the season, easily. Even with a year with a ton of embarrassing losses. I mean, the Bronco game comes to mind, the Bear game comes to mind. There's so many, the Cowboy game. There's so many embarrassing losses the New York Giants have had this year. So to say that is a huge thing. You know, whether it's coup, freaking kicking worms, I've never seen that before. The whole thing was a disaster. Jackson Dart still taking hits, not learning, it looks like, slid occasionally, but had some really nice moments. I still think he's awesome. I still think he's the quarterback of the future. I just hope he can be because he continues to to be put in these positions where he's getting hits. He just won't get out of bounds. You know, that penalty on Theo Johnson, in my opinion, was Jackson Dart's fault. He's trying to scratch for an extra yard. It just can't happen. And, it was incredibly frustrating to watch the New York Giants on Monday Night Football. And so the next day, you knew Joe Schoen was going to be in a hot, heavy, interrogation like environment where it's like, listen, you're 5-30 in your last 35 games. What's happening? What's the problem? Now, I have been pretty fair with Joe Schoen. I've been very fair. I think a lot of people say I can be more than fair with Joe Schoen. I've been more than fair. I have given him credit for certain draft picks. There's video footage out there that he may not have been the main guy driving the Jackson Dart train. It was likely Brian Dable. He tried to kind of reverse that in the press conference. He sounded like a desperate man, a man that knows probably not keeping his job after this year. Despite that statement from the Mara family, you had this thought that maybe Joe Schoen was going to come back, and maybe they were considering him. But towards the end of that press conference, it really didn't look like that. It looked like he was on the verge of tears. That's what it looked like. It looked like he was holding in and was very emotional, which, listen, you don't like to see a guy in a situation like that. Everybody's human. This is probably a job he's dreamed of. And the unfortunate reality is he has not built a good enough team. He hasn't. He hasn't built a good enough roster. He's built a losing roster. There's a lot of bright spots. There's a lot of things to be excited about. I think the next general manager, the next regime, isn't going to have to work that hard to make the team much better if they're assuming they're good at their jobs. I don't think it's going to be that difficult, especially as difficult as when these two originally took over. But this team is losing games in embarrassing ways. Even when you fire Brian Dable, didn't change a thing. Fire Shane Bowen, who I was very much fire, still not changing anything. So when you look at that and you're like, okay, something up with the team, something up with the depth on this roster, something up with the attitudes of this team, something up with the chemistry. Ultimately, that falls on the general manager. So we sit here. The New York Giants season is completely over. They are 2-11. They come in with a lot of intriguing talent that is disappointed. It's a tough schedule. The schedule is definitely unfair. We've said that. At the same time, the next regime is going to have to win games, as we know. But Joe Schoen, it gets to the point where you've had three disappointing seasons that just seem to get worse. And it's time for a fresh start. And you're talking, this is somebody who was very much on the side of being patient and keeping up. And then it gets to the point where if you're not seeing improvement, especially in year three and you're in year four, when I say year three, I mean starting from their 6-win season, basically since they paid Daniel Jones. It's not good enough. That's 3 years in a row of losing, getting worse in a lot of ways, because this is a much more talented team than last year. They may finish with 3 wins again, with a lot more talent. I think a lot of that is schedule, for sure. But this is the NFL. There's a lot of games the Giants could have won this year. And the kicking situation is enough to get Joe Schoen fired himself. The kicking situation has been an absolute disaster. Now, do I think a a a good coach and good general manager make this team into an 11-win team next year? I do. I think there's a lot of intriguing talent. For a lot of general managers, you can point to a lot of the good things that they did. But ultimately, what matters is their record. Sometimes there's a lot of context to that. I've been a defender of Sean Marks. I think there's a lot of context to why the record isn't as great as, per se, or why things were cut off so quickly. I think he did a lot of things any general manager would have done. And that's kind of my defense for him. Joe Schoen, on the other hand, needed to win games this year. He's built a roster that hasn't. They're not winning games. And I think there's things he did that you can point to that were good. I think there were things that if he was in another location, another market, could have been better. I think he might have seen this thing through. But if you're playing in New York and you're losing for this long, the players are not going to be happy. And when the players are not happy, the team isn't going to play well. So even though the talent in that room is extraordinary, you have some guys with a lot of really good talent. They're not winning games. They don't even know how to win. And it's unfortunate because, especially with how exciting the Scattaboo Jackson Dart pairing seemed to be early in the season, Scattaboo obviously got hurt, Neighbors got hurt. You could see the vision there. That was the vision. Things took a turn for the worse. But that happens in the NFL, and you have to be prepared. You have to be prepared. When an Andrew Thomas injury happens, your offensive line can't fall off a cliff. That has happened with years past with Joe Schoen. When Malik Neighbors, and they've done okay without Neighbors, right? But Russell Wilson, big mistake. I think we can say it now. Russell Wilson was a big mistake. Starting him at the beginning of the season, big mistake. They didn't act with enough urgency. And when it gets to the point where you're going to lose your job if you don't win, there's too much pressure. It's like having a gun to your head. You can't think rationally. There's a lot of things that Joe Schoen has done that, quite frankly, just don't make sense. Keeping certain draft picks on the roster like Jalen Hyatt, Deonte Banks, who do not deserve to be playing for this team anymore. Evan Neal, guys like that. Just putting Brian Daboll in a terrible position the last 2 seasons after his Coach of the Year win. It was not all Daboll's fault. I never looked at Brian Daboll and be like, this is such a abysmally coached team. I looked at a guy that was very passionate, probably didn't get along with people as much as he should have, was excellent as an offensive mind, but put Dart in places where he was getting injured, mixed with the fact they weren't winning games due to clock management at the end of some of these games, some of the decision makings, lack of being aggressive recently. That set up Dable to fail, but He didn't have good quarterback play for a while. He had bad rosters for a while. And there's not much you could do with a very bad roster. And Joe Schoen, especially last season, is what I'm talking about. And this year, when you lose early, people start to look and point fingers. And that's what's happening with the New York Giants. So, new regime is going to happen. It's going to happen. There's no way. There is no way Joe Schoen is staying after the season. There's just no way. And he knows it. And you saw that on display for everybody to see on Tuesday. Just abysmal. There's no other way to say it. It was sad to kind of watch it. You got to give the reporters credit for asking questions, but he looked like he didn't really know how to answer them. And how could you? For what you've watched from the New York Giants in the last 3 seasons, how could you defend anything? It is what it is. He knows it. He'll probably get some sort of assistant position in another place. I would be blown away if he's back. Blown away. And, we've seen John Mara do this before where he wants to stick around with a guy, say like Joe Judge, for example. We've seen it. It doesn't always work, right? It doesn't work out that way. He fired Judge. They hired the new regime. This, I think, is going to be a similar situation. This, and obviously we know John Mara is battling right now. So it's going to be interesting to see what decisions are made. Listen, the New York Giants are going to have a lot of candidates that want this job. And that's just, I don't think there's any arguing that, especially more different than last season. A lot of people are upset that they didn't fire Dable last year and hired Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel wasn't going to the Giants. He was going to the Pats the whole time. Why would he go to the Giants? Especially with the talent they had last year. At least with the Pats, they had Drake May. They didn't have Jackson Dart yet. Now they have Jackson Dart. Jackson Dart is very impressive to me. He's got to stay healthy. You got to keep him out from these late hits. You need a coach with accountability that's going to give accountability. Abdul Carter showing up late constantly, getting benched on first drives. Can't happen. You knew something was up with Abdul Carter. When he comes in saying, I want LT's number, I mean, what are you doing? You're setting yourself up for being a cocky asshole. That's what you're doing. Not saying that's what he is. He's a young dude. He's going to learn. I still think he's going to be an excellent player. I really do. I think with better coaching, better staff in place, better DC, maybe a better constructed roster, you're going to see Abdul Carter flourish. I really do. But right now, it doesn't. He's a kid that's, Kayvon Thibodeau has evolved. We're going to see, these guys are NFL players, are maniacs. So they have big egos, and Abdul Carter came in thinking he was going to be the best player in the draft, and he's been underwhelming. He's been awful. He's just been underwhelming. But this stuff, you can't, you could easily control this stuff, and, he's showing up late to meetings and stuff. He's got to grow up. That's simple. Jackson Dart, I hated what he said in the press conference after the game, saying this is football. Yeah, I get it. We're not stupid. We're not stupid, Jackson. We get it. It's a physical game. We get it. But every quarterback that's ever played is telling you to take less hits. Troy Aikman, who doesn't even remember important playoff games that he played in, is telling you to take less hits. He played in a completely different time, a much more physical time. And he's like, get out of bounds. Slide. Protect yourself. This isn't nothing, Jackson. And this is code for me that there is no coach in that locker room that is concerned about holding people accountable. I understand they have benched Abdul Carter. That's a sign of holding people accountable. I understand that with Mike Kafka. And I understand there are reports that they have had these conversations with Jackson Dart. I mean, clearly it's not reaching them. So you need somebody that's going. I think a lot of that too is they know those guys aren't going to be there. They know Mike Kafka is not going to be there. Did anybody really think Mike Kafka had any shot at this job? Interim coaches are always fugazi. I mean, even the good ones. As a Brooklyn Nets fan, Jacques Vaughn was an interim coach for a while. He did excellent as an interim. The second he got that contract and became a head coach, he was one of the worst coaches in the league. Mike Kafka's done no favors for himself, but he was never the guy. Never the guy. Maybe the next coach wants him back as an OC. I have no idea. I think the offenses look good all season, so some guys are better, being a coordinator than a head coach. Maybe he's one of those guys. We'll see. I have no idea who the Giants are going to hire as their head coach. I know a lot of people want experience. I know a lot of people want the perfect mind of a head coach. Something tells me that it's going to be somebody who's going to be a coordinator. That's what it's whether it's Kubiak in Seattle. I don't know. These are decisions that, I know every New York fan wants some manager, coach, GM with experience, something that they've done it before. And I do think that's valuable when you're talking about a New York franchise. Oddly enough, though, they don't go with those decisions because they know what those guys are. Oddly enough, the team that you've seen in New York that hasn't done that is the New York Knicks, where they brought in Tom Thibodeau and fired him and brought in Mike Brown. Like, we know what those guys are. We know what we're getting from those guys. Knicks have put together some really good regular seasons. They've had some successful playoff runs. But, you know, maybe that's something the New York Giants can do. I think they've been trying to hire the next Wizard coordinator. Hasn't worked so far. Obviously, you got Dable winning Coach of the Year. That's not nothing. Ultimately, I thought Shane has failed Brian Dable. And the product's just not good enough. Next year, more experienced guys, new regime, fresh start, weaker schedule. I think you're going to see a different New York Giants team. At least I hope. But right now, this team does not know how to win. And that Joe Shane press conference was really hard to watch. Very hard to watch. Next, I wanted to talk about Devin Williams signing with the New York Mets. And Devin Williams is a player that I was not a big fan of in the last year. I was excited when the Yankees traded for him. This was a guy that I understood the history with Pete Alonso, but he had an excellent season. Nestor Cortez gave up one of the most heartbreaking home runs I've seen in my life. Probably is the most heartbreaking with the Freddie Freeman Grand Slam. I think it was a Grand Slam, right? I don't even know. Whatever it was a home run. Actually, I don't even know. I want to wash that memory from existence. But Nestor Cortez gave that up. So giving up him for Devin Williams when the Yankees needed a closer or at least more bullpen help, I thought was an excellent move by Brian Cashman. I still defend Brian Cashman with that move. I think every GM would have made that move. Problem is, Devin Williams came here and he blew the division. Simple. He blew the division. And if you think I'm being dramatic, well, the Yankees tied with the Blue Jays this year in the regular season for the best they tied. Blue Jays had the tiebreaker, but they had the same record in the regular season. And could have used home field advantage in that series. I still think with how hot and how great the Blue Jays were playing, Toronto still wins. Considering how close Toronto was to winning a World Series this year, Toronto still wins. However, when you put yourself in a position where you're playing on the road in a place where you do not play well in Toronto, Devin Williams blew that. And it wasn't just Devin, like Volpe was a lot of it, but there's so many games last season where the Yankees were up a ton of runs, where the offense did its job, and Devin Williams would blow it. It happened like too many times. Devin Williams might have been responsible for about 12 losses this year. I don't know the exact number, but he was responsible for that many losses. It wasn't just bad bullpen guy loses his confidence. He went into, he was an absolute train wreck where I was talking about DFA him back in late August. He was that abysmal. And you moved him down. You had him as a middle relief pitcher, and he pitched much better. But even in the playoffs, he still gave up big runs. In that elimination game, he didn't do his job. Bases loaded, but he can get the outs. We would like that. So he's going to the New York Mets. David Stearns, there's some familiarity there. Is the move good if the move is only good if they bring Edwin Diaz back? Because if they don't bring back Edwin Diaz, who's probably the best closer in baseball, you're going to have Devin Williams closing these games. And considering the history of the New York Mets and how they've blown games as a franchise, I don't think one Met fan is going to feel good about Devin Williams closing a game. Even if Devin Williams has a really good regular season, you're not going to trust this guy in the playoffs. He has to earn that trust. I'm not saying he's incapable. I'm just saying he's not going to earn your trust. Mets fans in particular, they've seen it. They've seen Pete Alonso hit one of the biggest home runs in franchise history off this guy. They've seen it. So they're never going to trust him. But as a middle relief option, I think it's fine. $51 million is a lot, so David Stearns better be right, because after DFAing Frankie Montas, which a lot of people found questionable, even though he pitched pretty well in Milwaukee, you're David Stearns is on a lot of eyes are on him right now, because although his first season, I think he deserves a lot of credit for that run. I thought he brought in a lot of, he didn't bring in the big pitcher and stuff, but he brought in effective pitching. And last year, a lot of these guys just broke out of it. They did. Sean Manaea was bad. Peterson was bad at the end of the year. Just Senga, Senga was obviously there before Stearns, but the pitching just fell off a cliff. So obviously the New York Mets need better starting pitching, and things will work out. I think Soto will probably be better next season. My hope for them is that they bring back Alonso, just for Mets fan. I think Mets fans want Alonso back. I think it's really important to have a guy that's homegrown like that, especially after you make the Brandon Nimmo trade. Um, there is this whole thing with the Mets right now where you're looking at Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz. Are they going to bring those guys back? I would like to think they will, but even if you are going to bring those guys back, you still need to improve this team. You have to improve the starting pitching. Devin Williams might be an upgrade in the bullpen. Might be. If he's a middle relief guy, upgrade. Maybe. I mean, we saw the Mets and the Yankees both trade for a bunch of bullpen arms that we were excited about, and it blew up in their faces, especially for the Mets. Especially for the Mets. At least the Yankees were able to get another closer in Bednar after Weaver and Williams fell off a cliff. The Mets, Ryan Hensley, he's gone. I think that's how you say his name. All these bullpen guys are just gone. And they were all terrible pretty much. So, when you need starting pitching, there's different ways you can get it. You can find guys that are, like Griffin Channing, for example, last year, before he got injured, was pitching really well. Classic Stearns pickup, it looked like, where you brought a guy in who wasn't great the year before, but comes in, starts pitching his ass off. There's been a lot of staff changes with the New York Mets. They've changed a lot of Mendoza's staff. And we're in a point right now where the New York Mets are coming off one of the most disappointing seasons in baseball in their franchise history. I don't know if it quite meets 2007, but it's up there. It's up there. But they're in a position now where they can have a really good season this year. But I would like to see them bring Pete back, because if you lose Pete, what are you getting on offense? I guess Kyle Schwarber's there. There's something to me, though, about drastically changing a clubhouse like that. So if you're letting Pete Alonso walk, that tells me there is something in the locker room that is not working with Pete Alonso. Now, the New York Mets went to the CS. Pete Alonso had one of the biggest hits in franchise history. The fan base loves him. That would be pretty surprising. And has Kyle Schwarber changed that? Maybe. Kyle Schwarber's been on a lot of winning teams. Mets are well aware of him. Had a terrific season last year. I think the Mets would much prefer Pete Alonso. I think a Mets fan would much rather prefer that. So we'll see what contract Pete Alonso is going to get. You see that the Red Sox are interested. In fact, I think that is probably the number one threat to take away Pete Alonso is the Boston Red Sox. I don't know if the Red Sox are going to spend money. This all comes down to, whether obviously it's Scott Boras. So are the Mets going to pony up and pay the guy? They may look at the last few years and they may be like, yeah, we made the CS. We had some good moments. We like Pete. But we're cool with letting him go. Listen, he's a Boras guy. These negotiations are tough. The rumors are going to be crazy. I mean, people thought Pete wasn't going to be back last offseason. He came back. Nobody else seemed to be interested, and the Mets didn't want to give him anything long term. I think there will probably be more interest this year, forcing the Mets to maybe pony up with a better offer, long term offer, to keep him here. Doesn't make sense to me if the Mets let Pete Alonso walk, especially with this Nimmo trade, because now they need an outfielder. Now, Cody Bellinger, this leads me to the New York Yankees. The Cody Bellinger, Kyle Tucker thing, we know that Cody Bellinger is also a Boras guy, and we know he's going to want the biggest offer. And the reality is, it just doesn't seem like the Yankees. I think the Yankees are like fine with letting Cody Bellinger go. I would be okay with that if you were going to get Kyle Tucker. But it looks like the Yankees are going to do that. They're not going to do that either. I was for the qualifying offer for Trent Grisham because I thought if you're going to keep him, bring him back on a 1 year salary, especially after the season he had last season, I thought that was okay as long as you weren't signing him to any long-term deal. But I thought that because I thought you were either going to bring Cody Bellinger back or you were going to re-sign or sign Kyle Tucker. It doesn't look like any of that's happening. And then when you look at shortstop, Anthony Volpe, Jose Caballero, these are not great options at shortstop. Even though I like Caballero, I mean, to win a World Series, I think you need a better option. And it just looks like they're going to do the whole thing with Volpe again. They're going to be like, he was hurt. We're going to give him another shot. As per usual, as what we've seen, the Yankees are the last team to know these things. So get ready for another year of Anthony Volpe at shortstop. Ryan McMahon at third. Excellent. Loved his defensive glove. Can't hit. Doesn't hit well enough. Doesn't. What's the deal with Jazz? Jazz is going to be a free agent next season. He's in a contract year. I like Jazz, but let's face it, Jazz made some big mistakes in the playoffs last season, including in that elimination game, booting that ball. His attitude, for some, is not loved, but I thought Jazz had an excellent season last year. I'm a big fan of Jazz Chisholm. He's got to tighten up a little bit in big moments, but I love him. I really do. Ben Rice at first needs to improve that defense. I think he's a fine option for your first base. I do. Listen, the starting rotation with Cole coming back could be awesome. Rodon could be a contract you could move if you want to get a bat. Fine. But if you're going to bring back Rodon, I think it's fine. I mean, that's a really good rotation, ideally, on paper, especially with the evolution of Cam Schlittler. So the outfield with Judge and Grisham, and you're going to have to start, and obviously Stanton coming back. Stanton's regular season was excellent. He had like maybe a moment in the postseason every once in a while, but was very underwhelming considering his postseasons in the past, especially the year before. I think the Yankees ran into a red-hot Blue Jay team, and I think Brian Cashman thinks that was a really and I did too. I thought it was a deep team. I think Boone thought that too. And it wouldn't shock me if they just ran it back and just said, well, we're getting Garrett Cole. We can find another outfielder at the deadline, make some, I understand not making sure your team is 100% set before the season. Like, I get it. But, at the same time, you shouldn't have to put yourself in a position where you have to do so much work. Because Cody Bellinger was very effective in their regular season last year. They were not good against um, good teams. They had like a couple moments in September, but against good teams, the Yankees were not good. So they need to change that. They need to be better. It was the opposite the year before. They were good against good teams. And this past season, they weren't. They racked up a bunch of regular season wins. So maybe they're thinking, all right, no Cody Bellinger. Maybe I have no idea. I have no idea. But I'm sick of being disappointed by the Yankees off seasons. I'm sick of it. Soto's off season, that was a good one. Obviously, they went to the World Series. But they traded for Jazz at the deadline. That's probably like the most satisfied I've been with a Brian Cashman offseason and trade deadline in a long time. I don't know what to me the move was Kyle Tucker. If you weren't going to trade for him last year, and I don't look. It looks like that's not going to happen. So I have no idea. That's what scares me with the Yankees. But as far as this offseason in baseball, it's really about are these teams going to retain guys that were on the team last year? And if they're not, how are they going to pivot? If the Yankees don't re-sign Cody Bellinger, how are they going to pivot? If the Mets don't re-sign Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz, how are they going to pivot? How are they going to bring those guys back and make the team better? Maybe they're the team. Maybe they're the Cody Bellinger team. We have no idea. It's going to be fascinating. And as the winter meetings get going here, we're going to see. There's a lot of talent. Like both teams should be good next year. I don't think people anticipate the Mets to fall off a cliff like they did last season again. I think people expect them to be better and get into the postseason, especially with the owner and how much he spends. And Stearns, a lot of people don't like him right now, but Stearns has a history of taking teams to the postseason. So with way less money, and there's a lot of talent on this team. Pitching fell off a cliff. This Mets team, the last few months of the year was a disaster, as we know. But the first half of the year, they were really good, and it made sense why they were good. So, I think it's all about for them just kind of cleaning up that locker room a little and seeing and fixing up that pitching. Brandon Nimmo seemed like a really nice guy to have around, and they moved him, so maybe they're looking at things a little differently. That move only benefits the Mets if they get an outfielder that can provide some offense, because Nimmo's defense in left wasn't good. That contract was probably not going to age well. And it makes sense to do what they did, but they have to make more moves. So, and maybe it was just to free up some flexibility where they do sign Pete Alonso, Edwin Diaz to long-term contracts. They much rather have those two than Brandon Nimmo. Maybe. Maybe. But Stearns is going to have to work some magic this summer because a lot of people are looking at him and they are not a fan of him right now. I wanted to get into this. The Giannis Antetokounmpo rumors have really heated up in the last week. Giannis Antetokounmpo is obviously a champion, MVP, multiple-time MVP. He has been in trade rumors for, it seems like, 2 years now. Whether the year before, it seemed like it feels like Giannis has threatened to leave Milwaukee for a couple years now. Every move the Bucks made, whether it was trading for Dame, it was to try to keep Giannis long term. We're reaching this point now where it seems like a boiling point, where this does feel like this is the last season for Giannis Antetokounmpo as a Milwaukee Buck. Here's the thing, and with Giannis, as we know, he just suffered a calf strain. He's going to be out for 2 months. I think 2 months, right? 4 to 8 weeks, I'm pretty sure. But here's the thing with Giannis. For the way he plays, I believe he's 30 years old. For the way he plays, signing up for Giannis Antetokounmpo, especially after this recent injury here, I think a lot of teams are still going to do it anyway. They're obviously still going to be interested. He's Giannis. He's an incredible player. It would just scare me. It would scare me for a team like the Knicks. Now, everyone knows I'm a Brooklyn Nets fan. I try to be as fair as I can. Maybe I'm a little too snarky and too cynical with them. Just jokes. I have been very honest about my opinions on this New York Knicks situation. I thought the Mikal Bridges trade was very stupid. Don't think many good front offices would have made that trade. I've been consistent with it. I'll admit if I'm wrong. I have said that if they make the NBA Finals, the deal is worth it for them. I don't think that's asking much when you're deciding to give up your whole future and you're trying to win a championship. I just thought it was a move that a lot of smart GMs would not have made for reasons like this. Giannis Antetokounmpo, we knew could be unhappy and ask out in a year. And the New York Knicks had the perfect situation with depth, trade pieces, and future assets to make a deal for Giannis and still have depth on the team with Brunson. That was there. Because they traded for Mikal Bridges, that went away. Because when they traded Randall for Towns, they gave up DiVincenzo. Why did they give up DiVincenzo? Because they threw away their entire future for Mikal Bridges. They could have replaced DiVincenzo, added another salary, and added another first-round pick, and I'm pretty sure Minnesota would have still took that deal. Maybe you needed to add a third pick, and you put a heavy protection on it. But DiVincenzo, I don't think had to be in that deal. And I think the only reason why he was because of this Bridges deal. Because then they had nothing else of draft capital to trade for a Towns deal. So you're in a situation where you're all in on this team. So the only way Giannis goes to the Knicks is if Milwaukee just takes a lesser offer, which is possible. It's possible. If Giannis just wants to go to the New York Knicks, Sham said the other day that's not the case, but let's just say that's not true. Let's just say Giannis will only go to the Knicks, which, by the way, happened this offseason. He requested a trade, and he said, I know they haven't really fully said it, but Brian Windhorst said the other day, he requested a trade, and he said, trade me to the Knicks. The Bucks called the Knicks. The offer's not good enough because the Knicks don't really have much to trade that makes any sense for Milwaukee. I said this when the Bridges trade was made. I was like, not only is he not worth this package, this prevents them from trading for a superstar and getting better. So even if the Knicks trade for Giannis, you're admitting that the Mikal Bridges trade was a failure because you made a deal that sacrificed your entire future that you don't think made you good enough. When you could have just waited a year and traded Giannis easily. If Mikal Bridges was not a Knick, if the Knicks did not make that trade, Giannis would be a Knick right now because they would have the assets to make the deal happen. Now they don't. You could do pick swaps. You can put Towns in the deal. You could put OG Anunoby. You could put Brit. The Bucks are rebuilding. They have no interest for veteran talent. So the only way that really would be happening, I think, is if they did some, multiple team deal where they're somehow getting their picks back, because that's what I think what the Bucks truly want. Their picks are in Atlanta and New Orleans. I think Atlanta becomes an interesting team here. Is Atlanta or New Orleans going to take one of those Knicks players in a trade and then maybe Milwaukee gets their picks back in return? Maybe. I have no idea. All I know is that the Knicks have to make the finals this season because next year the East is going to get better. So if the Knicks don't make the finals this year, ideally, how are you making it next year? And we've seen the Knicks. And people are going to be like, well, you're just hating on the Knicks because you're a Knicks hater. I have said this. I thought what Leon Rose was doing up until this Bridges move was brilliant. I thought it was brilliant. They were flexible. They were really good right away. They had a great culture. They had a really good coach. Their star loved the coach. They fired the coach the next year because they went all in and they weren't as good as maybe they thought they were going to be. Why weren't they as good as they thought they were going to be? Because Mikal Bridges was not worth that offer. I understand he made a couple big plays in that Celtics series. If you ask me, the reason why the Knicks won that series is because Boston played two of the most embarrassing fourth quarters I've ever seen in NBA history in games 1 and game 2. Notice how I didn't say the Tatum injury, which obviously sealed the deal, but that's not the reason I thought that. I thought the Celtics just played two of the dumbest fourth quarters. Is that the Knicks' fault? No, it's not their fault. But if you play that series 9 times out of 10, the Celtics win, if you ask me. And the Celtics will be back next year. They'll probably be better. You know, the Pacers are going to be back next year. They're going to get a top 5 pick. These are things to where the Knicks have to make the finals this year. Also, if you make a mid-season trade like that, that's crazy. Here's the other thing that Knicks fans need to realize. It's why I wonder if trading for Giannis Antetokounmpo is even beneficial to them. In order to make that trade happen, even if the Bucks make that deal, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Jalen Brunson, and pick one of OG Bridges or Towns is the team, and then it's nothing, pretty much. That's pretty much it. It's a thin roster, which means if something happens to one of these guys, maybe not even one of the stars, maybe even some other role player, important role player, they're not going to be good enough to beat an Oklahoma City Thunder team or probably a Denver Nugget team or a Pacer team or Celtic team. Here's another thing that needs to be said about Giannis. If you take away that year where he won the championship, and I get it, it's a championship season, not taking away what he did. But let's be honest here. They were getting their ass handed to them by the big three Nets before two of those guys got hurt. So, take away that season. What has Giannis done in the playoffs? Disappointing exit against the Toronto Raptors after being up 2-0 in that series. Disappointing series in the bubble versus the Heat. I think the one series you could point to where it wasn't so disappointing, and I think he had bad luck, was that Celtics series where he didn't have Middleton. He was up 3-2 in that series, if I remember correctly. The next season, hurt, lost to Miami, but he played in those final games. Next season, hurt, lost to the Pacers. Last year, lost to the Pacers. Is a team of Giannis and Brunson with not much else good enough to win? I would tell you no. That's what I would say. So you could say I'm crazy. You could say, listen, there's ways for the Knicks to maybe find depth. I don't even think the Knicks are as deep now necessarily. So I guess you can argue like, well, they're not as even super deep now, but they have more bodies. And it might be more beneficial just to keep what you have. I know Knicks fans hate Karl Anthony Towns right now, which I knew was going to happen. Here's what I would say to Knicks fans there. Julius Randle was a player that drove you nuts. And Randle's playing well in Minnesota. Gave up pot. We know the whole deal. Julius Randle was not a player that many teams are going to be frothing at the mouth to get. So when you trade him, what do you really think you're getting back? Dante DiVincenzo's a role player. What do you think you're really getting back? The Timberwolves tried to trade Cat for a while. Again, not many people wanted him. So you get what you get. And Towns is putting up offensive numbers. Towns has been in the conference finals, like, consistently. 2 years in a row. So, you know, you got to understand that, like, you get what you get with Cat. Like, he's going to have stupid fouls. He's going to have games where he doesn't look aggressive. Like, we get it. And it's infuriating because he's incredibly talented. Towns is not the reason why the Knicks are underwhelming. Maybe part of it, a little bit. He is the second best player on this team. The Knicks didn't trade their whole future for Karl Anthony Towns. They traded their whole future for Mikal Bridges. Mikal Bridges is the reason why the Knicks can't improve the team. It's not talked about enough. And I think the reason why is because a lot of fans look more at players, since the Knicks didn't give up any players in the Bridges deal. I think they gave up Bogdanovich, I think, right? And maybe it's another guy I'm forgetting. But They didn't really give up anything. So player wise, pick wise, they gave up a crap ton, but player wise, they didn't really get rid of anybody. So I think Knicks fans see that and they're like, oh, we can't rip bridges. We didn't give up any players for him. Yeah, but you give up your whole goddamn future. Your whole future is gone for a role player. A guy who's playing much better this season. I acknowledge that. But is he like really making like this massive difference right now? Is he the reason why you're winning games? Or is he just kind of piggybacking a bit and making and some impact? I'm not saying he's, but Mikal Bridges is not the reason you're going to make a championship run. You're going to make it because of Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns. Those two. Listen, if the Knicks win a championship, I'm the one who looks stupid and is wrong and stuff. But to me, OG Anunoby is incredibly impactful. Listen, I've gone through this many times. We're just going to have to see. You know, in my opinion, if the Knicks make the finals this year, it's a win-win deal for both teams, the Brooklyn Nets and the New York Knicks. I still think the Brooklyn Nets can get a lot from that trade, even if, say, the Knicks make the finals, for example. Because with the way their salaries are constructed, the fact that they're not flexible in the future, they're in a situation where things can get really bad really quickly if they do not make the finals this season. I think a lot of people think they're going to be good for the rest of the decade. That's not really how it works, especially with the new CBA, where it's hard to keep these nucleuses with big contracts. Just being honest here. So if the New York Knicks trade for Giannis, that might be the move because they may not have a choice. They may disappoint this season. They may have just go all in and try anything. But if you bring Giannis to the Knicks in a couple years, will they win a championship with Brunson, Giannis, and kind of that's it? Maybe. Maybe. If we're looking at the history or this decade of how teams are winning championships, that's not the way they're building their teams, though. I will say that. But the Knicks would get their star. Now, I thought they could have had their star a year and a half, if they didn't make that deal and be in a much better position, but they still may get that star. Because I look at the other teams around the league that make sense for Giannis. I look at the Spurs. You can mention the Rockets. You can mention Atlanta. There's teams out there that make sense. Miami. To me, San Antonio makes the most sense. I've heard Cleveland thrown around there if they want to depart with Mobley. But to me, Giannis probably wants the Knicks to be his future home. He wants New York. I think Brooklyn would be in that conversation if they were much better, but Brooklyn is tanking right now, and they need to, in my opinion, it's best for the franchise to not do that. So we'll see. But if you had to ask me still, I think the Knicks possibility is possible. I just don't know if it's the right move. I don't. And I'm just being completely honest with you. And if you think I'm wrong, that's cool. But if you just look at this decade, how teams are winning championships, it's the Indiana Pacers, it's the depth. And a lot of Knicks fans have said this, too. Not just me. It's the depth of the Indiana Pacers and the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Boston Celtics, right? And the Golden State Warriors a few years ago. And, we were just seeing a lot more depth, right? And even that Bucks team, right? That was a deep team. They had Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton and Brooke Lopez. Like they were a team, and it's easy to make a team in 2K and kind of fill in the cracks. It's not easy to do that in real life. So we'll see what happens with them. Let's talk about some entertainment stuff. The breaking news of Netflix buying Warner Brothers. What does this mean for the film industry going forward? Obviously, we know Netflix is definitely has taken over streaming. When Netflix came in, it put Blockbuster out of business. Netflix is the streaming service that is grandfathered in. Everyone tried to copy Netflix, right? You're seeing all these other streaming services basically doing the Netflix formula. So Netflix buys Warner Brothers, one of the most iconic, brands in all of film. I love Warner Brothers. I love so many things made by them. But this comes to an interesting discussion. What is this going to do? Is this going to mean we are eliminating, theater screenings? Is that being over the top? Are we moving away from that? Are we completely cutting physical media? Is Netflix just going to kind of own all this and everything is just going to be streaming? It's possible. It's possible. Eventually, I'm sure that is their goal. However, I think a lot of people, especially recently, you're seeing this resurgence with physical media. I think the second people like a movie, and I've talked about this before, like a movie and you can't watch it on anything, people start to get upset. And that would be my warning to Netflix. That's what I would tell them. Be like, listen, there's a lot of people that love going to the theater still. There's a lot of people that love this brand. They want to go to the theater. They want to see these things not made in an algorithm. They want to see a lot more heart made to them. You're just going to have to be careful of that. Because a lot of the films, I love going to the theater. I haven't been to as much this year, but I just got my stubs back, so I'm going to be doing that a lot more. I just saw Wicked for Good, which I'll talk about soon. There's this thing with the theater that's just a magical experience, and a lot of people love it. And they're not going to it as much anymore because let's face it, I mean, it's a lot more expensive, and everything being expensive nowadays makes it difficult to take, especially a family, to the theater. However, there are movies that people are really excited about. Next year, I think there's going to be a ton of those. Spider-Man Brand New Day, Avengers Doomsday, the Michael Jackson biopic, I think is going to make a crap ton of money and could generate a lot of excitement. And I also think we're going to see Avatar 3 coming here. I think that's going to do well. And then obviously Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. So those are just a handful of movies I think people are just excited out of their mind to see in the theater. And, obviously Wicked for Good, a lot of people want to see that too. So there is still a love for the theater and a lot of people still, it's a going out, it's good for your mental health to go out and not always stay in your house and watch stuff. Streaming, I'm not going to tell you streaming sucks. I use streaming a lot. And it's very convenient. I also collect physical media. I think it's good to have a balance. I really do. I think we're seeing obviously a dissolve in physical media because these people, companies want you to use their streaming service. Makes sense. But you better have everything. That's what I'll tell you. And I think there's something mentally that is more satisfying when you pick up a physical disc. And, streaming services is becoming a lot more expensive. And, you know, I think if you own a film or you maybe just don't want to buy a million streaming services, you're going to see, I think, less people be a fan of them as much as before. Because when I first got Netflix, I was 18. I was 18 when I got Netflix. I got my first Netflix subscription. This is back in 2018, so I was a little late to the party, but I was blown away by Netflix. Even since then, 7 years it's been, we've seen a lot of changes and a lot not great. And considering how great of a year it was for movies, and I think the theater in 2019, um, I would like to see us go back to that. Um, but Netflix buying Warner Brothers, I think, is scaring a lot of people. I think we're all quick to conclusions nowadays to where we're automatically thinking the worst. Um, I think there's going to be a demographic of people that still like physical media, still going to love going to the movie theater. I think a valid concern though with Netflix is they every once in a while will release an awesome movie. Marriage Story comes to mind. With Noah Baumbach, Martin Scorsese's The Irishman, right? Like they they come out with good stuff, you know, and obviously like there's shows that have been very successful on them, Stranger Things, which I still need to watch the first four episodes of. Would love to talk about that soon. There's things like that, right? However, it's important to note there's a lot of crappy Netflix movies. They have a lot of crap. A lot. A lot of movies that just don't feel like they have any soul to them. Say what you want about the early 2000s, early 2010s, the 90s. There's a lot of 80s. There's a lot of cheesy, bad movies that came out of the as in any decade. There was a charm to them, though. There's a charm. Like when I watch Jingle All the Way, which I just watched for the first time. If you want to follow me on Letterboxd, I'll leave a link in the description. It's really fun. I love marking everything I do. The thing with Jingle All the Way is it's a really dumb, stupid movie. Really dumb. And not good, I would tell you. However, there's soul to it. There's charm to it. There's character to it. I remember scenes. I remember the feeling I had. There's some Netflix stuff where you watch it and you're just like, I'm never going to remember anything from that movie. I'm never going to feel anything. I'm not going to remember how I felt during that movie at all. And there's a lot of that with Netflix. Now, there's a lot of that with a lot of stuff that comes out today. There is. But, that's definitely the worry. I think that's more of a concern I have than, say, no physical media. Because let's be honest, that's heading in that direction. I think it'll be like vinyl records, though, where people like to keep it around and people will pass it along and there'll be a market for it. And same thing with the theater. I think in 100 years, people will be like, oh, let's go still see a theater. Let's just go to a theater. I think enough people go to them where they'll be around for sure. People love movies enough where they'll be around. That's what I think, at least in the next 100 years. That's what I would say. I think there's a hungry for good art. I think there's a lot of people who do not like what's being released. I don't think people just are spoon fed it and take it. Obviously, with the rise of AI, there's concerns there. Um, there's entertaining AI things, and then there's fear that AI is going to take over the world. And, there's always that. We're always either in the 100% good or the 0% bad or whatever, 100% bad, whatever. We're always assuming the worst or thinking of possibly the best outcome of something. I like to fall in the middle. So there's obviously going to be a big reaction to this. Um, I think it's important that we're not super quick to conclusions. And listen, if you like physical media, keep buying physical media. If you love going to the theater, keep going to the theater. If you like streaming, stream. Ultimately, as long as there's enough people in your market, I don't think it's ever really going away completely. I mean, vinyls were dead back in the day, and they're back. People collect them. They look cool. There's a nostalgic period we're in right now. I think even younger, a lot of people that are a little older than me, or around my generation, are showing their younger kids old shows, introducing them to physical media, physical stuff. And I think that's important. I think that's going to continue. I do. So, do I think it's the end of the world? No. Is does it show a shift? Yeah, it does. It does show a shift. But Netflix got to be careful because if you own a property like Warner Brothers and you piss off a lot of people, it's going to backfire. And so it's important to bring that up. I wanted to talk about a new film release. So I watched Wicked for Good a couple days ago. It's been out for a bit, so I know I'm definitely late to this party. But let's talk about this because when I first saw the trailer I saw it with my girlfriend a couple days ago, And, obviously she is a big fan of the play, and I really enjoy the play myself as well. I got to see the Broadway show before these films came out, which I'm very happy. A lot of people have not done that. So, I have an idea going to these movies. When I saw the trailer for the first one, I thought it looked terrible. It looked fake to me, which is weird because the movies, I actually am a big fan of how the movies look, but that trailer, for some reason, I didn't like the way the movie looked. Um, they changed some things. They changed the way some songs were sang, including Defying Gravity, which I didn't care for. It just didn't look great to me. It looked like it was going to be an overemphasis on CGI. It was going to be fake and all this stuff. And then they announced that they were going to make it into two parts, and that scared me too because I'm like, is Wicked worthy of two parts? I mean, the play itself is 2 hours and 45 minutes, I think. So, and the first movie, I think, is like both movies are combined. I think it's like 4.5 hours. So that was a big concern I had. The interviews these two are doing are hysterical. But that's let's not get into that. So the next thing is going into the first film. I didn't have my expectations were low, but I enjoyed it. I did. I didn't think it was the greatest thing I'd ever seen. I think a lot of people, fans of the musical, loved it very much. I just think my biggest issues with the first was just pacing wise, which is what's going to happen when you split a movie into two parts. That's what happened. And I kind of have the same feeling with this one. Wicked for Good tells the second half of the play. This is where you really see the tie-ins to The Wizard of Oz. And to me, it's fan fiction. Some people are upset about canon or whatever. And there's a scene with the Tin Man that's hysterical when you put it up next to the Tin Man in the original Wizard of Oz. It's hysterical. Um, So I look at it as fan fiction. That's what it is, I believe. I'm not this huge Wicked head, so like it's fan fiction is how I see it. I don't really look at it as canon. So it's an interesting take on a story that's was told. It's from a book from 1900. So and a film from 1939. So you know I've always enjoyed the first half of Wicked way more. The first act of the play ends with Defying Gravity. That's my favorite song. I, you know, it also has Popular, another iconic song. All of the music is really good in this new movie. Things really come to an end and a conclusion in this movie, and that's why you are going to be entertained by it at times. However, the first half, again, has these moments where you're like, does this movie really need to be two parts? That's really it. I understand you don't want to release one 3 hour cut of the movie. Like if you felt like I understand some songs, from my understanding, are not in it, in both of these films. So I think I understand why they were made into two parts a little bit more now. It's just when you make that decision, there's pacing issues you're going to naturally just come upon, and not everything is going to be as interesting. I will say this movie does a good job with the conclusion. It looks great. The music is great. The performances are great. They all are. I think it's best used when you watch it. You watch part one and then you watch part two, similar to how I feel with Halloween and Halloween 2. Watch them both like that. And in 4.5 hours, you can have a really big double feature night, and it would be a lot of fun. Maybe you can get some Chili's margaritas and, take them home or something. I have no idea, or make them yourself and then just, watch Wicked Part 1 and Part 2. They're fun movies. They are. And I enjoyed myself. I enjoyed my time. There was never a moment where I was like, get me out of here or anything like that. Like, they're really fun movies. A lot of people are complaining about how messy they are. This new one is. From my understanding, I was able to follow everything pretty conveniently. I just think naturally when you make a two-part, there's just issues you're going to run into. Because of that, I've actually been into The Wizard of Oz recently, and I watched Wicked. I gave it a three. I gave the first one a 3.5 stars on Letterboxd this year. I gave this Wicked for Good. I gave it a 3 star rating, which is not bad. I think a 3 star rating is good. Um, that's how you're just gonna have to read my letterbox rankings. 3.5 is very good, 4 is great, 4.5 is excellent, 5 is masterpiece. So 3 stars. I thought it was a good movie. Had a fun time. Um, and I just don't think that second half of the play is as interesting as the first half of the play. That's really what it is. It's not really too much fault of the filmmakers themselves. It's just you naturally don't get as good a product. If you said I was watching them both together, I probably feel a little bit differently. You know, but that's what it is. I think it's best used as double feature on its own, and you're judging the movie on its own. There's just things that's going to suffer because of that. But because of that, 2 days later, there's these VHS intros on YouTube that are awesome, where you watch, like for example, like I had a lot of these Scooby Doo films growing up, and a lot of the VHS intros are on YouTube. So I watch those from time to time, just occasionally when I want to feel a little jolt of nostalgia or something. And I saw a VHS commercial for The Wizard of Oz VHS, the remastered version, and they mentioned the 50-year anniversary documentary narrated by Angela Lansbury in that. And I actually watched that the other day, and just loved it. Just loved it. Obviously, we're aware of the production issues with Wizard of Oz. And I was actually surprised to see how much they go into it. They go pretty well into it for a 50-minute documentary. It's a nice watch, quick watch. I highly recommend watching it because of Wicked being out right now. The Wizard of Oz is one of my all-time favorite films. I think, obviously I think most people love it. Um, it's iconic. And I love stories of old movies and old filmmaking. And it was just very interesting to peel back. It's on YouTube. You can just watch it for free. You don't have to go to a streaming service or anything. Oddly enough, Warner Brothers is the YouTube channel I think that has it. So if you want to go watch something pretty cool, narrated by Angela Lansbury, she's great. She sounds like, I said this in my Letterbox review. She sounds like a grandmother, obviously rest in peace. She sounds like a grandmother that you're just captivated by when she wants to come and tell you a story. That's the best way I can explain it. And it's really fun to kind of see these tapings and this background story on The Wizard of Oz. And I think it's a fun time of year where you could see it, especially with Wicked for Good. I'd recommend seeing Wicked for Good. You definitely have to watch the first one though. Wouldn't watch this one without watching the first one. That's for sure. Especially if you have no idea of what the play is. But if you've seen the play, I would be shocked why you wouldn't see the first film. So it's fun. I love, obviously, I just love the excitement around the movie. Anytime a movie generates a ton of excitement, even if I don't particularly love it, I love that. I love how everybody's excited for this one movie because it's good. It's ultimately good for all of us if these movies do well. So that's going to do it for the JB podcast today. I appreciate you guys listening and talked about a lot of stuff, a lot of interesting stuff. And we're going to get into more going next week. And I can't wait to talk about it. You guys have a good one. Hope your Thanksgiving was good. And let's get ready for Christmas because I'm excited for that too. And might have some ideas coming up in the future. So thank you guys for listening to the yeah, Jesus. Thanks for listening to the JB podcast. And I'll see you guys next time.